Should we get started? Welcome to the Innovative Cities Lecture event. And today's event is co-hosted by UW-Milwaukee Department of Urban Planning and UW-Madison Department of Urban Planning and Landscape Architecture. And the topic of today's event is regional planning in Wisconsin, new contexts and new strategies. Before we delve into the discussion and the event, let me begin by land acknowledgement. We acknowledge in Milwaukee that we are on traditional Potawatomi, Ho-Chunk, and Menominee homeland along the southwest shores of Michigami, North America's largest system of freshwater lakes, where the Milwaukee, Menominee, and Kinnickinnic rivers meet, and the people of Wisconsin's sovereign Anishinaabe, Ho-Chunk, Menominee, Oneida, and Mohegan nations remain present. With that, we are so happy to have three leaders in our Wisconsin's regional planning agencies to join our event and serving on the panel. They are Kevin Muhs, Executive Director of Southeastern Wisconsin Regional Planning Commission, and Lynn, Executive Director of West Central Wisconsin Regional Planning Commission, and Bill Schaefer, Planning Manager of Greater Madison MPO Metropolitan Planning Organization. We're so grateful, the three of you, coming to our event and join the discussion. The panel is moderated by Professor Carey McAndrews from Madison's Department of Planning and Landscape Architecture. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Carey. Thank you.
Thank you, Ivy, and thank you to our esteemed panelists for being here and to our audience for being here. We are excited today to launch into a discussion of regional planning in Wisconsin. But before we start, I just want to do a quick check of our technology. To everybody in our audience, thank you for being here. I want to check that the chat messages are working. So I'm going to say test, test in the chat. Could somebody confirm that you're seeing that message, please?
Yep.
Okay, and somebody else in the audience, right, who isn't so much on the panel? Excellent. Now, good. Okay, so this means that if we're going along and we're cruising and you have some questions and you want to put them in the chat, go ahead and do that. I think that will be the clearest way to have that communication. But it also looks like there are some reactions at the top of the screen, probably for you, I hope, so like a thumbs up or other things. Those are also options for you to use. Are there any other logistics that I should cover? Please stay muted unless you're talking. Hi, Josh. You may pop up with video, but probably best to have the panelists on video. Okay. Some more people are joining us. So today, let me turn to our content. Our discussion today is going to focus on our regional planning organizations in Wisconsin. We have three representative examples here, although there's a great diversity in regional planning and the organizational forms that takes. So we're going to cover three main topics today. Who are we as an organization from the perspective of each of these directors? What is unique about what each of these planning organizations does? And how do they do their work to achieve their unique missions? And within all of this, we'll weave in questions about the dynamics of regional planning, as well as the subtle differences, and sometimes not so subtle differences between the different organizational forms and the types of planning that happen. And we'll go round robin with each panelist during today's session. I'll pose a question, and each panelist will have about 5 minutes to respond. If you don't use up all that time, that's fine. We'll just pass it back. There'll be a chance after each question for panelists to ask one another questions and for audience members to ask some questions, and then we'll move on. And we'll try to keep it with a nice flow. So I will stop my preliminary introductory remarks here, and I will begin with our question. And our first question We'll begin with Kevin, and we'll go in the order of our invitation, which is Kevin, then Lynn, then Bill. So to start off, we'd like to just set it up for us. Let's hear about, describe your city, describe your region, describe your metropolitan area. What's the mission of your organization? How long have you been in your job? Please give us that overview so that we can all get up to speed and start from the same place. And we'll start with you, Kevin.
Okay, great. Thanks, Carey, and great intro. As Ivy said, I'm Kevin Muhs, Executive Director for the Southeastern Wisconsin Regional Planning Commission, or SEWRPAC. We got that acronym assigned in 1960 and have been going with it ever since. And we serve, as our name implies, the southeast part of the state, which is dominated by the Milwaukee metro area, but also includes the areas between Milwaukee and the state line with Illinois. So some parts like Kenosha, which are maybe even perhaps more part of the Chicago area than they are part of the Milwaukee area. It's about, the region is a little over 2 million people, 1.3 million jobs. It's a third of the state's wealth and people and jobs, while being only about 5% of the state's land. And so it is a pretty heavily urbanized area in general, but of course does have some rural parts to it as well, particularly Walworth County and other parts of other counties. So fairly large area, very dynamic urban area, also an area that faces incredible disparities when it comes to issues around equity, educational attainment, income, things like that, poverty rates. Those divides are largely along racial lines in our region, particularly within the Milwaukee metro area, but also in the Racine area. And so that is something that we as an agency pay a lot of attention to and are trying to do what we can within our role to address as well. Specific to the agency, we provide advisory planning to the 7 counties and the 147 cities, villages, and towns within those counties. On anything related to transportation. We are the federally designated metropolitan planning organization, and also things like land use development, housing, environmental areas. We deal with wetlands and natural areas and endangered wildlife habitat and things like that. We also have a fair amount of work that we do for stormwater management and water supply and water quality. So that pretty much covers the gamut of what we do. And I have been in my job since January 1st, 2019. So a little over 2 years now. Although I worked for the Regional Planning Commission, SEWRPAC, this Regional Planning Commission, since about the middle of 2012. And I'll turn it over, I think, to Lynn next, right?
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lynn Nelson. I am the Executive Director of the West Central Wisconsin Regional Planning Commission, and we were created under state statute in 1971, and we cover 7 counties in West Central Wisconsin, including Barron, Chippewa, Clark, Dunn, Eau Claire, Polk, and St. Croix counties. We're primarily a planning and technical assistance agency, much like Kevin's organization. And we provide services in 4 areas, including economic development, transportation, community development, and then natural resources and planning or mapping. Some of the types of projects that we work on, some example projects, are things like we administer a regional business revolving loan fund. We write grant applications for communities to secure funding for infrastructure so that businesses can expand and grow. We provide staffing to the Chippewa-Eau Claire Metropolitan Planning Organization, and then we do a wide variety of planning types of documents, such as comprehensive planning, outdoor recreation plans, placemaking, bike and pedestrian planning, and lots of other things. We have a staff of 13 people and an annual budget right now of about $1.5 million. We're governed by a board of 21 commissioners, and that includes 3 appointments from each of our 7 counties. The funding for our organization comes from a variety of sources, including state and federal funds, a membership fee that's paid by county entities, and then we also enter into agreements with local units of government for specific projects that they're needing done. The area that we serve covers about 420,000 people. It's a mix of rural and urban. Our largest community is the city of Eau Claire with about 70,000 people. And while the majority of our counties are rural, we're also home to the fastest growing county in the state, which is St. Croix County. Our region comprises 7.2% of the state's population and 11.5% of the land area. So flipped from Kevin's. Fewer people, more land mass. I have been the executive director here for 7 years now. And like Kevin, I played a role at the Regional Planning Commission as a planner prior to that. I worked in the area of economic development for about 13 years, left and went to the private sector where I worked for a company, a manufacturing company, really looking at funding resources for their customers and sales, and then came back to our organization as the director. So thanks for inviting me to be part of this panel.
Thank you for being here. And we'll pass the mic over to Bill.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bill Schaefer. I'm the planning manager / director for the Greater Madison MPO. And so as the federally designated metropolitan planning organization, our mission is to lead the collaborative planning and funding of a sustainable, equitable transportation system for the Greater Madison region. Our official planning area is the metro area, which covers about 3/4 of the land area within Dane County, but about 90% of the population. We do some planning countywide, though, and obviously need to account for travel in and out of the county as well. And we work with our partner agency, the Capital Area Regional Planning Commission, which is responsible for the land use and environmental planning in the county. The MPO and RPC were at one time the same agency, but the MPO was split off from the RPC in 2000 for political reasons, and as I guess part of the fallout from that, what caused that, the RPC in Dane County was actually dissolved for a couple years and later recreated. So some interesting history there, and as already been noted, MPOs and RPCs, or COGs as they're called in some areas of the country, are different, set up very differently in different parts, even within Wisconsin, as well as other parts of the country. I'm sure a lot of you are pretty familiar with Madison, but the unique geography of Madison, with the downtown sitting on an isthmus, certainly from a transportation perspective, presents some unique challenges as well as opportunities. I was going to say Dane County was it is the fastest growing county in the state, but I don't know. I hear St. Croix County is, so I have to check the facts on that. It might be we have the most people being added, and percentage-wise, St. Croix County is the fastest. But we'll have to fight over that distinction. But certainly growing fast, strong economy, and including being the seat of state government. And also from a transportation perspective, Madison is often cited as one of the top bicycling cities, regions in the country. I'd say top 5. Rivaling, Portland and Boulder and Davis, California, are some of the others that it's often compared to. So our core responsibilities include serving as a forum for regional transportation decision-making amongst, the state DOT, the county and local governments, preparing a long-range regional transportation plan, either leading or assisting in various special studies and plans that supplement the regional plan or provide more detail to that plan. We also approve federal funding for projects through a document that's approved every year called the Transportation Improvement Program. And then we also administer what's called a transportation options program. Basically, we have one staff person whose main focus is working with employers and individuals to promote alternatives to driving alone. And so I have been with the MPO since it was actually when I first started, the MPO was part of the RPC in 1998. And so I've been with the MPO for 23 years, and I've been the manager for 11 years. So quite a long time.
Thank you for this. Thanks to each of you for introducing your regions and your organizations. But let's go in the direction of, let's think about how each of your regional agencies might be set up differently or have unique sort of approaches to what you do, some slight differences in your mission, perhaps, even though there would be overlapping themes. You know, to think about, well, what are the different ways we might think about regional planning in Wisconsin? What are some flexibility? What are some types of flexibility we need to keep in mind in the way that regional organizations are doing their work? So let's just think about that. How would you describe what is unique about what you do, maybe compared to other regional organizations that you know about, either of the panelists or others that you'd like to compare yourselves to? And for this one, let's start with Lynn, and then we'll go Lynn, Bill, and Kevin.
Okay. Well, I have two examples of what I think makes us unique. One is a little bit more programmatic, and another is how we try to approach our work as an organization. The first example of something innovative that I think that we do, and that's starting about 10 years ago, throughout our entire region, there were individual pools of loan funds available for businesses at the local level. So there were a total of 33 either cities, villages, or counties that had loan pools that could provide gap financing through businesses. And that funding was secured through a state program, primarily through a community development block grants. And the problem was really that they weren't being managed as effectively as they could be throughout the region, because often the responsibilities of managing those pools of funds would fall on community, whoever happened to be working at the community level, a clerk, a staff person, and they really didn't know how to manage those pools and do so in an effective way and market it. So we undertook an initiative to try to consolidate all of those loan pools into one regional loan pool. And we were very successful in doing that. 32 of the 33 units of government came together in a partnership to consolidate all of those funds. And if you know how protective units of government can be over their money, it was a pretty big deal to have that happen. So we now administer that loan pool that was capitalized at $17 million. And it's been a really important funding source for our region because it allows businesses to grow and to have access to gap financing. So they come to us when they have a project that they want to use to expand their facility or add staff, but because of some risky parts of their project, a traditional commercial lender can't provide the full amount of money. So then we can step in and ensure that projects that otherwise wouldn't have happened do happen. So it's increasing the tax base of our region and adding jobs. And it's been a really important and somewhat innovative tool, I think, to really strengthening our region. And one of the benefits to having that framework in place is that as the pandemic occurred and businesses really started to struggle throughout our region and really throughout the US, we already had a structure in place to secure additional sources of funds and to quickly be able to disperse that money. So in addition to this $17 million loan pool that we had, we ended up running 2 separate loan pools for counties. And then we're able to secure additional money through the Federal Economic Development Administration for relief funds. And we're also going to be running a region-wide community development block grant program that provides grants to businesses. So something that made sense and was innovative 10 years ago has really turned out to be something that's very, very beneficial in the time of the pandemic. Another way that I think that we're unique is how we try to look at ourselves and combine what is a public structure and with what's best from the private sector, and how can we best meet the needs of the units of government throughout our region, our partners, and sort of combine the best of both the public and the private sector whenever possible. So examples of the types of things that I'm talking about are, for example, when we look at customer service, instead of just sitting here and being more reactionary, we say, okay, how quickly should we be responding to our customers? You know, everyone should be getting back to with emails and voicemails within 24 hours, which I think is more of a private sector way of thinking about our work, but I think it translates well and makes our organization very responsive to the people and needs of our region. Same thing with marketing. We try to market our organization in a professional and, you know, a way that looks really nice and might not be thinking of something that comes from the private sector. And then we also try to be innovative with the funding of our organization, not just relying on state and federal funding sources, but also entering into contracts with local units of government for those types of activities that they see as most important at a local level, and stepping in and trying to fill that need with the expertise that we've acquired. So.
Thank you, Lynn. And we'll come back and we'll harmonize each of your responses, but let's put all of the information on the table and then we can work with it. Let's turn to Bill and then Kevin. Bill, how would you describe what's unique about your organization?
Okay. Well, first off, I actually kind of misread the question in a way in terms of what's unique. I mean, I was thinking more in terms of what's unique about a regional planning agency or an MPO. So I'll just first mention that and then talk a little bit about what at least one aspect of the way we're organized that I think is at least somewhat unique. So, you know, in terms of regional planning agencies, you know, we are strictly a planning agency. We do approve use of funding, but we don't design roads. We don't design bike paths. We don't operate transit service. We don't plan. We don't zone, you know, land and approve developments. And so, you know, our only hook is that federal funding. So we do have some federal funding, but otherwise we rely strictly on, you know, the power of persuasion, I guess, in order to accomplish our goals, our regional goals, and you know, through education, dialogue, and that, you know, that is a unique role for regional planning agencies, serving as that forum for regional decision making, whether it be land use, environmental issues, or transportation. But one way in which we're unique to some extent is there are different ways that MPOs and RPCs are organized, as I mentioned. In our case, when we were separated off from the RPC, which is an independent agency that is established, as has been mentioned, by state law, the city of Madison agreed to staff the MPO and serve as the administrative and fiscal agent for the MPO. So we have a policy board, but the MPO is not, you know, an independent entity that can enter into contracts, that sort of thing. We rely on the city of Madison. And so City of Madison, IT department, human resources, all that we rely on. And so, and even our emails say cityofmadison, you know, .com, which is, you know, creates some tension. I think we had a lot of goodwill to begin with, and I think we've kept that, but certainly that can lead to a perception that we are either a city agency or that we are biased in favor of the city of Madison. And I think that is a, you know, an ongoing struggle because the city of Madison does provide most of the local share funding for our budget. And the way our agreement was set up, the city of Madison agreed to do that, but then other communities were kind of encouraged to contribute. And we have a few suburban communities that do contribute, but many don't, and it's not a requirement. So I think that's unique about us. I know for other RPCs, MPOs, if a community doesn't contribute, then they basically don't have a seat at the table. Whereas that's not the case for us. And so as I said, I think it does present an issue for us that we just have to constantly strive to not only to maintain not only appearance but in reality kind of the objectiveness, and that we are a regional agency. We're looking out for the best interests, what we think the best interests are for the region, and many oftentimes that may coincide with views of the city, with the city, but we are independent. So I think it's a constant struggle for us, not being independent. And we have, since the split of the RPC or the MPO from the RPC, we have worked closely at a staff level on things like sharing, using the same forecasts for population and employment, and those sorts of things. We comment on urban service area amendment reviews from a transportation perspective and pride that. So we've been coordinating, but just recently there has been a greater effort to try to do a better job of integrating our planning efforts at even more at a policy level, and having a closer relationship between our two policy boards. And as part of that, one of the things is we are now co-located, so sharing the same office. Unfortunately, we weren't able to share the same IT system, which was part of the idea of co-locating, to be able to share files easy and that sort of thing, but that didn't end up working out, in part because the RPC's budget, comes from the county. Their funding comes from the county. Ours, as I mentioned, local funding, most of it's from the city. So, our budget is part of the city of Madison's budget. So there were issues there, but and we went through a coordinated joint rebranding effort as well, and just trying to present ourselves, to the public as partner agencies, because we certainly are. We recognize, and that's something we heard as part of the rebranding, was land use and transportation are interconnected, and should be planned together. I think that's a unique challenge that we have here.
Thank you, Bill. Okay, good stuff. And Kevin, and then we'll integrate. Okay,
sounds good. And all I was going to say in response to the kind of the middle of Bill's comments there was, despite being totally independent, Bill, we often face accusations of favoritism in one direction or another. So it doesn't necessarily go away, even if your email address doesn't say at a particular municipality. We always have, Southeastern Wisconsin, I think, has struggled to think regionally for a very long time. And that is, maybe it's a fault or a flaw of my agency, but it's also certainly something that, we are continuously accused of favoring either a suburban county or a rural county or Milwaukee or something like that. So always a challenge, which is fine to work through. So I think as an agency, Sewer PAC has long prided itself on probably something that is relatively unique. I know it's relatively unique nationally. There are more RPCs in Wisconsin like Lynn's that have or had this philosophy, depending on the RPC, but nationally it is pretty unique, which is that we've always viewed ourselves as an integrated planning agency. And so the original comprehensive plan for Southeastern Wisconsin, which was published back in 1963, was a land use transportation plan. So it was always intended that, in fact, the land use is part of our long-range plans is the primary element, and all of the other elements serve the land use element. And so that's a philosophical decision that is kind of runs through the entire agency. So transportation and our recommendations are all related to the land use outcomes we're hoping to achieve. Similarly, all of our environmental area preservation recommendations, our natural area recommendations, our water quality plans, all of those are coordinated with the land use element. And of course, housing, another major thing we do, is a sub-element of the land use plan. So that's probably the thing where we perhaps, I don't know that we're universally unique in that, but I do notice a difference between us and our national peers on that philosophy. The other thing is that, so a direct contrast to something Lynn mentioned, we don't do a lot of economic development, which is fairly unique for regional planning commissions within Wisconsin. We have M7, the Regional Economic Partnership in Southeastern Wisconsin, and they do almost all of the economic development work within the region. So that is not a key part of our specific part of our effort. We get involved in economic development when it relates to how quality of life and economic development intersect, or how movement of people and goods and transportation intersect with economic development, but we don't do the type of work that Lynn just talked about around a revolving loan fund or anything like that. And then something else, I guess, that I would say that the agency prides itself on, and we hope we succeed at, is that we are very customer service oriented, and we view our customers as the 7 counties and those 147 units of government. So we try to do our best to not be the regional entity that's coming in and bullying people into doing certain things. As Bill said, it's all about persuasion, but even subsidiary to that, we try to be very responsive to local government concerns. And I know, again, not so much specific to Wisconsin, but compared to some of our national peers, we do get comments that from those who have experience across the country that we are easier to work with, I guess. So, which we hope is a compliment as far as our ability to be responsive to local government concerns and try to identify common threads across the very different units of government in our region to bring their goals into an alignment and hopefully achieve something that is better for everybody. So those are probably the things I would focus on. As far as some of the technical details, I did want to, I guess, note that we do provide some direct services. We are the surveyor for 5 of the 7 counties, so we do have a shared services role. And that has grown or decreased over time depending on the demand from local governments for those sorts of shared services. And it is something that we're exploring right now, actually, given the pressure on property tax levies across the region due to state restrictions on increasing levies, whether or not there is a further shared services role that we should provide or not as an agency. And then finally, I guess I'll borrow something that I hear often, which is that our plans are also unique in that they are very technically detailed, and I think Bill called them wonky last time I talked to him, which is a strength, I think, but it is also a weakness. And so it's a strength in that a lot of the implementing entities, whether it's the state DOT or a local unit of government or one of our transit systems in southeastern Wisconsin, can often run with our planning efforts. And we really take pride in trying to put things together that they think are very grounded in reality and have the details they need to have. The downside of that is that we, as an agency, are only now waking up to the fact that we need to do a much better job of simplifying and communicating our planning efforts with the public. And so we have made a lot of progress over the past 10 to 15 years in that, but there's also a lot further to go. And I certainly look at what my peers do, including what Lynn's agency does and what Bill's agency does, with a little bit of envy occasionally as far as how slick it is and how well they communicate it. And so that's something that we, as I said, strength and weakness. I like our technical expertise, but we need to get better at talking with the public about what we do and why we do it and why we make the recommendations we make. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you for that, Kevin. Let me see if I can ask a couple of follow-up questions that may simplify or even oversimplify, but at the risk of oversimplifying, I just want to clarify a couple of things, and I seek your input. We understand that you have different organizational structures, and some of that is because of your status as either an MPO or an RPC or both. So is it correct? So Kevin, the Southeastern Wisconsin Regional Planning Commission is an RPC and an MPO. But Bill, the Madison MPO, which has now changed its name, I was going to call it by its old name, but now Madison MPO is just an MPO and not an RPC designation. But Lynn is West Central Wisconsin RPC, only an RPC or also an MPO?
We are only an RPC, but we provide staffing to an MPO.
Okay. And while we're on this topic, because this is technical, would somebody please help us understand what does that even mean to be an MPO or an RPC, and why does it matter?
Well,
go for it.
I'll start. I'll try. Even though I'm just an MPO person, but obviously, it is interesting because RPCs are a creature of state. I mean, the enabling legislation is state, from the state. So and the state law gives them all the powers that they have, including things I mentioned like contracting, but lays out their responsibilities and lays out how they're funded, where the funding comes from, and all of that. Whereas it's all inclusive, of the things that Kevin mentioned, land use, environmental, housing, all of that, comprehensive planning at a regional level. Whereas MPOs are strictly transportation planning agencies, and our authority comes from federal law. In fact, there is no reference at all in Wisconsin statutes to MPOs. There may be some reference somewhere, but I don't think I've been able to find anything. So MPOs are required by federal law for any metro area over 50,000 in population, and then for areas that are over 250,000 population, that's a special category of MPOs that have additional responsibilities, but then also we receive sub-allocated funding from the federal, from USDOT. And it's basically, there's three ways that MPOs and RPCs can be set up. One is that, like with sewer PAC, where they're one and the same. So there's one policy board for the RPC and for the MPO, and they serve both functions. And then another way that they can be set up is MPOs can be separate, and they can be hosted, like in our case, by a city or maybe a county in some cases, or the RPC can provide the staff for the MPO, but the MPO is has a separate policy board than the RPC, because often regional planning commissions have a broader geographic area than MPOs. Our area is really defined primarily by the census defined urbanized area based on population density and employment, whereas with regional planning agencies, they often be multi-county, as in the case of sewer PAC. I think Lynn, are you multi-county as well? Yeah. So a much broader geographic area, and that was actually one of the reasons why the MPO was split off. Was the city of Madison at the time was dissatisfied with the makeup of the RPC policy board at the time, because the city, even though the city at the time had like 75% of the population of the MPO area, there were only a small percent of the seats on the policy board. So the feeling was, well, the city didn't want people from rural areas making decisions about urban transportation. So there was a mismatch, there. And so that was the primary reason for the MPO being split off.
And Lynn and Kevin, would you like to follow up?
I can. I think Bill provided a really good, more of a technical, detailed description of how we work. But I think if you back up to a higher level view and maybe how Wisconsin works, or really any state, the regional organizations that we represent focus on areas that cover multiple jurisdictions and are interested in solving problems unique to that jurisdiction. So it's something that crosses political boundaries, big issues, where it makes sense for a regional type of entity, however it's funded, however it's established and enabled, to step in. And it can look a whole variety of different ways. But the main purpose is to assist in those big issues covering larger areas.
Yeah, that's a great point, Lynn. I think, we are somewhat unique in that the board is the same, one and the same for both our RPC and our MPO functions. And one of the reasons that's possible is because the geographic area that the MPO, if it existed separately, would have to plan for is basically the same geographic area we cover. The urbanized areas that Bill mentioned cover all but basically Walworth County. And so those are all within that urbanized area that would require an MPO anyways. So it perhaps just made more sense to have it be as an integrated entity. The only other thing I would add to what Lynn and Bill said, and I liked very much what you just said there, Lynn, as far as the overall goal, no matter what the structure is. But we as an agency do face challenges in the fact that there is differences between the federal MPO expectations and the state statutes expectations for RPCs and MPOs. And so state statutes are pretty darn clear that RPCs are strictly advisory. And federal regulations don't say that MPOs are not advisory, but for instance, in order to do a project that is considered regionally significant or is going to use federal transportation dollars, it has to be in our long-range plans and our short-range programming documents. So we cannot force anybody to implement our regional plans, but theoretically, the Regional Planning Commission could prevent somebody from moving forward with a project by removing it from the regional plan. That's not something we've ever done, and part of that is the tension between the federal regulations and that advisory nature under state statutes. But it is theoretically something that could occur, and so that is a tension that we do balance as an agency, being one and the same, where the MPO and the RPC are not separate at all.
So there are different sort of enabling sort of origins for these organizations, although they all have sort of a regional scope and this regional philosophy. From each of your descriptions, your portfolios of sort of content areas or sort of substantive planning areas might be slightly different. For example, the salience of economic development, or the salience of land management, or the salience of transportation. Could be different in your portfolio. But it is, do you also find differences in the relative sort of proportion or significance of discretionary work versus administrative work, or sort of that administrative legal constraint versus the discretionary sort of business mind, or even dare say entrepreneurial? Is that a meaningful distinction in the work that you're doing, or not?
For us, I would say yes. There are the core responsibilities that I mentioned that we do. Some of those are federally required. So there's certain requirements that MPOs must follow. There's planning requirements. There's products, the long range plan, the transportation improvement program that programs the funding for projects. Those are things that are required, but then we do have quite a bit of discretion for other things that we work on. And so for us, for instance, we certainly have spent a lot of time, do a lot of work in terms of bicycle planning, and historically transit as well, because those are our major emphasis areas for us. More recently, we've been doing quite a bit of work on safety, traffic safety, and so it is nice. And then also having this transportation options program. That's something that we've had dating back to the 80s, I believe. And it's something that many MPOs do not do, but that was something that was, has been a priority for us to provide that service, because of the importance from an environmental standpoint, from a transportation choice standpoint. So yeah, I think and really it's nice to have that flexibility to kind of work on issues that we think are most important, and be able to spend our extra time, focusing on those beyond what just we're required to do by federal law.
Yeah, I would just add, for us, and I think most of us, it's really the work that we do is dependent on the funding sources that we're utilizing. So when we are using state and federal funding sources, there's required things that we have to do, and projects and project outcomes that we have to deliver, versus when we're working directly with units of government and being more responsive to them at a local level and entering into agreements directly with them. We have a little bit more flexibility that way. So for us, it really depends on the mix of funding sources that we're using, if we have a lot of discretionary ability or not.
Yep, I'm not sure I've got much to add there. I think
Okay.
I'm in agreement with both as far as the differences. So yeah.
Maybe at this point, so now we've got kind of understand your scope and sort of what's the similarities and differences between your regional planning organizations. But let's think now about how you use finesse, how you use savvy, how you actually get the work done to achieve your ambitions and your regional mission, and how you can finesse that or evade challenge, undertake challenge, and find those successes. So there are two ways of asking this question. One of them is, what do you recommend for new people who are entering your organization? What kinds of knowledge and skills would students need, for example? Another way to look at that question is, what would you recommend to other organizations about interacting with your agencies? So one of these is sort of internally, how does the work get done? But then interfacing with external organizations, how does the work get done? And I'm not sure where you might want to, whether either of those is more relevant to your thought process right now. So I'll put both on the table for you to consider. And I don't know who should go first, maybe whoever is ready. Phil?
I can talk about, I'll start out by talking about skills that I think are needed for the work that we do. So there's a few sets, but one is certainly the kind of the technical analytical skills, which includes things like GIS, Geographic Information Systems. Almost all of our planners use GIS now. We also have a GIS specialist, but I think that's critically important to the work we do. And then kind of related is also data analysis, and particularly now working with so-called big data. So we have for the last year and a half been subscribing to a data analytics platform called Streetlight Data, which is data that's collected from people's cell phones and GPS devices. And then they have a platform to then access that data. And it covers everything from traffic volumes, speeds, origin destination information, all of that. And that's been particularly useful for us, especially now with the pandemic and travel behaviors changing and questions about how that's going to play out in the short term as well as the long term. And that's also something that we have, it's kind of a service that we've now been providing to local governments and in some cases our state DOT to run different analysis and provide that data for them, because that's something that it kind of makes sense for a regional agency like us to do. And so I think that's certainly kind of one set of skills there. Travel modeling is another one that's unique to regional agencies and DOTs. So I think that's one set, and then kind of related to that, kind of I guess critical thinking, and then and I think this probably applies to land use too, but for transportation certainly kind of systems evaluation. So we work, as a regional agency, we're looking at the big picture, the whole system, the whole network, not focusing on just one aspect of that. And so and nowadays especially coming up with performance measures to help drive decisions, to see how well the system in various aspects is performing, and then use that information to prioritize funding, prioritize strategies. That whole data-driven approach to planning is very, very important, and a lot of emphasis on that, and some federal requirements now related to that. So that's all kind of more in the technical realm. And then another big piece is the communication. We talked about how the work that we do, we're working with others, we're trying to get communities, everyone on the same page, working toward the same goals. And so that communication skills, both written and verbal, are critically important. And it was already mentioned, Kevin mentioned this about, kind of taking complex planning, engineering terms, and then communicating that to everyday citizens and politicians and the local officials that are actually implementing the plans that we prepare. If we can't explain it to them, convince them that this is what we should be doing, then it's all for naught. So the communication is part of it. And then I would say also I put in this realm graphic design, almost artistic skills in terms of presenting information in a way that people can, I'm always amazed at some of my staff that have those skills, and can put together a presentation or a report in a way that just is very pleasant, easy to read, easy to comprehend. And that's, again, critically important to conveying that information. So that's another skill. And then the last one being management skills, for both people management and project management. So I think those three areas are the ones, and they're all very important. And the people who have all of those skills are the most valuable to our organizations, for sure.
I think definitely agree with everything Bill just said there. The only other thing I would add to that is that if there is a particular thing, like it for me, transit is one of the things that makes me tick. If there's a particular thing that makes you tick, a regional planning agency is a great place to work, because we need people who are so interested in something that they are willing to dive into the minutia of it. There are a lot of federal regulations that dictate things. There are state regulations that dictate things. And we've got a lot of local governments that expect us to be right all the time. And so we need people who are very passionate about something and passionate enough to push through what may be the boring elements of it, and integrate that into your expertise and into your skills. So that's just in addition to what Bill said, because I completely agree. The three things he highlighted around technical skills and data analytics, having the expertise you need, being able to think at a systems level, and then being able to communicate your ideas and your thoughts both verbally and written are very important. So
I totally agree with everything that's been said. I think a couple of things that I would add is if you're a planning student, I think a regional organization is a great place to start, because Kevin talked about the need to really dive in and want to look at a specific topic, which I think is very true. But I think the opposite is also true, where we cover so many different things that you really get a taste of many different areas of study, and it allows you to become well versed in all of those and hone a whole variety of skills. Because one of the strengths of our organization, I think, is that we're flexible, and we have to be flexible based on the needs that we're seeing in the region. So if there's a huge need in transportation, all of a sudden 3/4 of our staff might be working on transportation projects, and you might not have any background in transportation, but you're going to be working on that, which I think is a real plus, because you get to learn different skills, and it keeps your job really interesting, because we're never doing the same thing, either from a topic area or from a geographic area. So I think it's a great place for new planning students to start. And I would also add that in addition to all of those very technical skills that are important, I wouldn't discount general skills, things like sales, customer service. I think all of those things are really important and integrate well into everything that we do in combination with those more technical skills.
This is actually not a bad segue moment. So there's a question in the chat. Zachary is writing and asking if there are ways that you have found that help get people, which is everyday people, private citizens, business owners, public officials, to so-called trust data again, or to have confidence in data, to have confidence in the analysis, to have confidence in the organization and in planning itself. I would extend this. And are there ways to present data that get more buy-in than other ways of presenting data? And maybe this even connects to this question of both communication and data analysis, but maybe there's something in here also about being that generalist or being the specialist, right? And, is it easier for a generalist to convey I don't know. Maybe this is something for each of you to consider.
I think when it comes to our data and our forecasts and the analyses we do, we found first and foremost just being as transparent as we can be, and I personally find leading with my chin a little bit is helpful. Leading with the weaknesses gets people to feel more comfortable with what you're saying, so you can say, here, look, these are our assumptions. This is what we're going in with. And this is the way, if it doesn't turn out the way we're assuming, this will be the result, we think. And so talking more about the proper context for using data and using forecasts and using predictions for the future. And we've tried to do what we can to reframe that conversation too around the concept of what is the future you want for the region, rather than the data is forcing us to do X, Y, or Z. And so how do you use data to understand and challenge the future you want, whether or not maybe it's realistic, but how do you also treat the data with a grain of salt and understand how it was collected, how we're using it, and maybe some of the difficulties with using and applying that specific set of data to the circumstances we're facing. So I know that was very general, because we cover a lot of different things, but that's generally my philosophy and the philosophy we're trying to implement as we approach data. So use it, but understand the weaknesses and tell people about the weaknesses so they can make their own decisions.
Yeah, I would just add, do those things over and over again. right? It becomes part of your culture, and you become known as a trusted individual, trusted organization in the way you handle and present that data. And so, I mean, you make a mistake and present something in a way that's misleading, and people don't forget that. So it's really being consistent in how you're being upfront with everything you're doing.
I would add to Kevin mentioned, to also, you mentioned being transparent, and part of the transparency is the assumptions that go into things like forecast, and being very transparent about that, as well as kind of margins of error for things, whether it's census data or surveyed, any type of survey data, and just the emphasis on the fact that the data is a tool for making your decision, and even if they're maybe even within the margin of error, regardless of that, it would still drive you to the same conclusion, to the same, outcome, to the same project. And so thinking of it, yes, we don't have absolute certainty, but we're using this information as a tool to make a decision, and it's not about not focusing on the perfect data or the absolute 100% accuracy of the data. It's just that we have the information that we have, and yes, there's some uncertainty, and I think for planning now, there's certainly been there is a lot of uncertainty, and that's why, scenario planning has become such a big topic. Not scenario planning in the sense of, different types of growth assumptions, but scenario planning in the sense of drivers of change, things, that, with technology, climate change, all these things that can impact the future in ways that we don't know. We don't know how they're going to play out, and so we need to maintain as much flexibility as possible, and in terms of paths that we're taking, which can become very difficult for, like from an infrastructure standpoint, because, we're designing a bridge that's going to last 50 years. And what does that mean to be flexible to account for uncertainty when you've got that? I guess it's just to understand that, uncertainty and decide and use that information to help decide, does it make sense to make this investment, to make the bridge, to spend the extra money to make the bridge wider when we don't know whether we're going to need a wider bridge or not, or not. So yeah, I think just putting it in context, but I also think that there is an art to presenting data, particularly maps, in a way that is easily understood, at the same time also a recognition that you can use data and create maps to make a point, or reflect a point of view that you want to present, and people understand that, and that maybe that's part of the reason for the distrust of data. But that certainly is an art, and particularly important in our fields.
This is okay. These comments are definitely speaking to sort of how the work gets done and how one can be effective. There are two questions right now in the chat. Thank you also to Adam, and then also to Caleb. I'll take them in order, but maybe we'll see if we can integrate them. So Adam's question is about scale. So Adam is asking about RPCs and MPOs, regional organizations, regional planning organizations that are in different regions, working together or communicating with one another. It's a question about information sharing going on between regional planning organizations. So we already have issues that are regional in scope. And so now Adam is saying, not only do we have issues that are regional in scope, we have issues that transcend those regions and maybe get into this intergovernmental or spatial or other types of regions. And so how does that work happen? The second question, though, while we're linking things together, Caleb is asking, how do you make sure that equity is integrated throughout plans, and not just an element or an afterthought? And by equity, Caleb is introducing socioeconomic equity and potentially justice, racial justice and equity, questions of ability and disability. So one is sort of about scale, but maybe these questions of justice and equity have their own scale too, and need also a certain type of linking. Do these questions from our audience today generate a response from you? How would you answer them?
I will take a stab at the larger region and integrating projects together. I think that there is a lot of those efforts that take place, and we really do work hard to make sure that happens. At the Regional Planning Commission level, we have a statewide organization called the Association of Wisconsin Regional Planning Commissions. And it's the executive directors of all of those organizations getting together quarterly and talking about what's going on in their region and within their organizations. And so it's a great way to get to know people from the other regions and to hear about issues that are going on, ways they're approaching problems. And I think from that comes cooperative ventures as well. I know we reach out to regional entities around us all the time to coordinate projects, to talk about issues, to get examples, all of those types of things. And I think that plays back to really one of our roles as regional organizations, and that is the sharing of information. Information, issues, case studies, all of those things are really important, because when you're dealing with entities, smaller entities that make up a whole, often one of those entities is experiencing a problem that another entity has figured out a solution to. So we act as kind of this conduit to sharing that type of information, ideas, working together. So I think that's really ingrained into everything we do, and what was behind the formation of regional organizations and MPOs.
Yep. Yeah, just to add, in addition to the RPC meetings that Lynn talked about statewide, there are MPO statewide meetings as well that the state DOT actually coordinates. I think it's every other month, maybe it's either 6 times a year or 4 times a year. I'm struggling to recall right now. And then we also, at least at SewerPAC, we do also talk to other large councils of government and regional commissions across the country. At least once a month, I have a meeting, nothing too formal, just idea sharing and updates and things like that with the leaders of many of the top 40 or top 50 metropolitan areas in the country for basically my equivalents in a COG or an RPC across the country. And I find that personally to be extremely useful. Helps us learn what's going on, helps us find out what other regions are facing. One of the more interesting things that happened recently related to that is we were actually able to share a lot of the housing work that we've been doing for a fair amount of time now. A lot of our peers, particularly on the coasts, are just stepping into housing as housing becomes so incredibly unaffordable in some of our coastal cities in the U.S. And so they're, as regional organizations, being tasked to help solve that problem. In California, it's a formal state requirement, but other parts of the country, it's, on the East Coast, it's not a formal thing, but something they're working on. And so we were able to talk both about how we might be able to help them and also how our situation is quite different. And so that was a useful experience, just as one example of the sorts of discussions and sharing that happens at those meetings. So.
In your responses to this question, oh, I'm sorry, Bill, I was only going to summarize that this is calling attention to the role of peer learning, peer networking, in doing that communication across agencies, but also specifically the role of cases and sort of case studies, and what is the information that people do share when they get together. It does sound like there's a fair amount of sharing of practices, and that maybe that isn't so much of that might not be a bottleneck. There's a lot of sharing. But Bill, what was your comment?
Oh, I wasn't gonna, I mean, I didn't really have much to add to that. I was gonna speak to the equity question. But we had, there is also a national association of MPOs that we're part of. And so, and we get a lot of information through that, although, it is interesting because there's such a variety in terms of the politics, the way that different agencies are organized, the size and resources that they have, and so it is hard to sort through all of that. It's not as easy as just finding, oh, this MPO does that, let's do that, because that may not work at all in the Madison metro area, even though it works in Florida or wherever. So there's a lot to kind of sift. You have to kind of sift through and kind of figure out what is applicable to your particular region. But as far as equity, that certainly is a very hot topic. I mean, it has been for a while, but even more so, obviously, with events over the past year. And I think it is. I mean, the comment is appropriate in terms of like, how do you make sure that it is integrated throughout the process and not just something that you do after the fact to make sure that what you've already recommended, doesn't have any disparate, impacts on, people of color, low income, those, and so the way to do that is to just integrate that sort of analysis, looking at the impact of, how for us, for the transportation system, how the current system is serving or not serving those populations that she mentioned, persons with disabilities, low income, minority folks. So and then as you're doing the analysis and making recommendations and making, to have that to be looking at the impact that those will have, or even better yet, prioritizing, identifying, which we do, prioritizing projects that will benefit people, particularly areas with concentrations of those populations. We are required, as a federal, one of the federal requirements is to do an analysis of our plans. But it is, I think in the past, it had been easy to kind of wait till the end of the planning process and then say, oh yeah, we got to do our environmental justice equity analysis, and then kind of justify, and so I think there's much more of an effort to incorporate that up front. And then obviously a big part of that too is trying to reach out and get input from those people. Yes, we have data, but I think when you talk to people, you get more information on their values, their priorities, their personal experiences, and that helps put a context to the data that we have access to. So I think it's important, to have both, and that's a challenge. It's an ongoing challenge. I'm sure for all of us, particularly as regional agencies, to involve, anyone, but particularly, these sorts of groups of people in a regional planning process, because it's long range, it's regional, it's beyond, it doesn't have oftentimes, or at least they don't see an immediate impact. If they invest time in this, how is it going to impact their life, versus something that's at a neighborhood scale, or that's related to a project that's going to happen in a few years and they can see that benefit. So that's definitely a challenge. But there's no easy solutions. But there's certainly a major effort. And I guess the other thing too is is understanding the history and how we got to where we are now, and even how land use and transportation planners and the planning community have kind of contributed, to the racial disparities and things that we have today, and understanding that history, understanding the history of, the freeway in Milwaukee, some of the neighborhoods that were obliterated from, and obviously we're not doing that anymore, but understanding that history, I think, is really, the redlining and all that, I think is important as well.
Yep, recognizing that we don't have a whole lot of time, Carey, I would just want to add to that, that everything Bill just said, definitely agree with. The involvement is very important, doing it, integrating it throughout your process. Something we struggle a lot with as an agency, and that's why I want to just add a little bit of time on this, is we do generally think we do a pretty good job on equity-related issues in our planning efforts. We always learn more. We've got some pretty passionate advocates in our region that push us to do more and do better all the time, and we really appreciate that. It's a interesting back and forth, and we're always learning new things. What we struggle with a lot is the implementation part of it. The implementation of the things that we recommend as a region is not equitable, and is not seeking equity. And that is not to throw shade at any particular implementing agency or unit of government, but the way the funding structures work across units of government in Wisconsin, they are not geared towards equity. And so we struggle with that a lot as an agency and how to address that. So we could probably have another hour and a half just on that. So
that's a fine suggestion when we can. Lynn, also for Lynn, but also for everybody, we have just a moment left. Let's think about your final reflections that maybe link together these questions of equity, maybe the dynamics of regional planning, or questions of, how exactly does innovation happen in regional planning? How do you change? How do regional planning organizations play a role in that?
Right. Well, I think as I reflect on everything that's been talked about, I think it really points in the direction of the significance of regional organizations and the importance of entities that look at things on a broader scale in trying to solve some of these really big problems. I think they're very difficult to look at from a local level. And so the more people you can bring together, the more geographic areas, the better solutions and even implementation. I think it is more relevant, maybe even now, than when these types of organizations were formed.
Thank you, Lynn. Everybody, I am not 100% sure about this, but I think our stopping time is 1:20 and it is 1:19. Is that correct? Could somebody out there in our chat participants list world give us a heads up?
We say in the announcement 1:20, but we can for sure going forward with some discussion, kind of unofficial after lecture.
Okay, good. Well, this is fantastic. We are on time. So to work toward closure, what have we talked about? Who are the regional planning organizations in Wisconsin? They are varied. Regional planning is local and nuanced and diverse within the state. Responding to state statutes as well as federal policy, responding to local needs, requires both specialized and generalist planning visions, requires communication but before the communication, that sort of deep understanding, but also trust in relationships. That is the place for equity to be brought in analytically, but also through relationships, which then may shape implementation. What else? Questions from the audience and final follow-up from our panelists.
I was going to add one thing about how RPCs, MPOs can be effective. So one of the things that, kind of convincing, the folks is we did a joint values survey with our RPC that hasn't been informing their regional development framework plan and our transportation plan. And I think getting down to that level, I think that was really effective, showing that there is a lot of shared agreement, a lot of shared values that people in the region have, and then linking, that to goals and policies and so starting at that point and starting at those commonalities, and then having the conversation about then how you can get to those, what we can do to make change, to enact change to get those. So I think that was really helpful. But it's definitely not a simple thing. I mean, yes, as a regional agency, we can try to provide some leadership, but you need leadership at all levels. Like, we are more effective when we have staff at a local level who are leaders in their own community, and then we can, feed information to them, help them, and then they can also help us, with our messaging, and so it takes a lot of people. It has to be, I think, and Kevin alluded to this, it can't be a top down. It can't be the regional agency saying this is what, you should be doing type of thing. It has to be a shared understanding. And I think, like I say, I think coming from those values, I think that was really effective.
Can I just add one comment following up Bill's comment? What I learned, as a academic person, I always believe in regional planning, and that's where I practice, that's where I do research. And I feel more motivated and inspired, I guess, based on the panel. We've already understood the importance of our transportation planning, economic development, land use. So the agencies have been doing that. However, I think historically, a lot of local jurisdictions or even other states or other local governments, they argue that land use, they argue that housing and economic development is local issue. So there is a tension between regional planning and local authority. And based on the discussion today, I feel we are moving toward at least a promising future, and the local governments realize the importance to have the regional alliance, and we have to solve the regional problems and have a regional solution for all the small local jurisdiction fragmented cities, towns, villages to thrive. So that's what I got from this panel, and I feel inspired.
Let's hope you're right. I think it is true, but it is definitely more difficult on the land use side. People understand that roads, bus routes, bike paths cross jurisdictions, so they understand that it needs to be planned regionally. But land use, it's a little bit more difficult sell. But you can certainly make the case that for the impacts that one community's growth has on another community, and that we all benefit if we're growing in a planned, coordinated way that is more efficient, and more environmentally sustainable. So,
yeah. I'm going to make a pitch for my agency. We have job openings. When I see all the jobs questions, contact me. We have 2 openings right now. So
we also have 2.
Yeah,
Okay.
Feel free to forward us the job information, and we can forward to our listserv and our students.
This is a very happy note. Thank you. Thank you, Ivy, for the invitation to join. Thank you, Lynn and Bill and Kevin, for being panelists today. Thanks to the audience for being here with us and for your questions, which have been dynamite. I think this is a fine time to close, especially on that positive note of a positive integration of land use planning and scalar and intergovernmental relationships, and so forth. So thank you very much for being here and for your insights.
Thank you
Thanks,
for
everyone.
moderating.
Thank
Carey.
you.
Thank you so
You're
much.
very welcome. Here, we'll do the hands.
Okay.
There you go.
Bye.
Okay,
Thank you.
bye-bye.